Welcome to a session in which we will look at profits and profitability. In an earlier session, we saw that P&L statement of a business indicates how a business performed during a given period. The P&L tells us about revenues, costs and profits or losses. Let us take a closer look at the different types of profits and the concept of profitability. Do you remember how we define revenues and costs? Revenues is the money that a business earns from the customers by selling its products and or services to them. Costs is the money spent by a business on making, buying or selling its products. We also defined three types of costs. They are direct costs, indirect costs and other costs. Let us remind ourselves what each type of cost conveys. Direct costs are those which are directly connected to the making of products or providing services. Common examples of direct costs are raw material costs and the salaries paid to the workers. Indirect costs include those costs which are needed to run the business but not on activities directly related to making products or providing services. Some examples include rent paid for the office or interest paid on the loan by a business. The third and the final type of cost is called other costs. For example, if a business makes a donation for flood relief, then it is considered as other cost. When we discussed P&L, we saw two different kinds of profits. They are called gross profits and net profits. We define gross profits as revenues minus direct costs. The second type of profits which we will consider are called net profits. It is the final profit for the business after subtracting all costs from revenues and other incomes. We will now define a new term. It is called profitability. There are two types of profitability that are important for any business. The first one is called gross profitability or gross margin. The second is called net profitability or net margin. Let's understand both of them by looking at gross profitability first. We calculate gross profitability by dividing gross profits by revenues. Remember that direct costs are about making products or delivering services. Hence, gross profitability helps us gauge if the business is producing things or delivering services efficiently. This ratio or the percentage tells us how much gross profit a business makes per unit of revenue. Let's take an example. A business has a monthly revenue of 10,000 rupees. Its direct costs are 6,000 rupees. So, its gross profit is 10,000 minus 6,000, which is 4,000 rupees. The gross profitability or gross margin is 4,000 rupees divided by 10,000 rupees. This comes to 0.4 or 40%. So, the gross profitability or gross margin is 40%. What can this number tell us? To answer this question, let's consider another business which has a similar product or has similar services. The second business has monthly revenue of 20,000 rupees. Its direct costs are 13,000 rupees. Then, the gross profits for the second business will be 7,000 rupees. If we divide this by its revenue of 20,000, we will get gross profitability of 35%. We can now compare these two businesses. The first business has a gross profitability of 40% and the second one has 35%. The comparison now is interesting. From every 100 rupees collected from customers, the first business spends 60 rupees mainly on labor and raw material. But for the same 100 rupees of revenue, the second business spends 65 rupees on labor and raw material. This is 5 rupees more than the first business. So, the first business is more efficient than the second as it is able to make similar products or deliver similar services for less cost. The example shows the main use of gross profitability or gross margin. It shows us a good way to compare two businesses which make same products or deliver same services but have different revenues and costs. In our example, we can say that the second business makes more gross profits and it is better in that comparison. But gross profitability shows that the first business is more efficient in managing its direct costs than the second business. Let's look at net profitability or net margin now. We calculate net profitability by dividing net profits by revenues. Remember that net profits take into account costs of all business activities. So, net profitability shows us how the overall efficiency of a business is compared to another similar business. We will take our example forward. The first business has an indirect cost of 1000 rupees. Hence, its net profits are 3000 rupees. Its net profitability or net margin is 3000 rupees divided by 10,000 rupees. But why do you think these efficiencies are important? To understand the answer, let's consider our first business again. Let's assume that it grows slowly but steadily for a year. Next year, its monthly revenue is 20,000 rupees. If its gross and net profitability remain the same, then we can say that it continues to be as efficient as it was 1 year ago. We can then calculate gross profits and net profits after a year using the gross margin of 40% and net margin of 30%. We can do this by simply multiplying the revenues by margin. So, the gross profit comes to 8,000 rupees and the net profits come to 6,000. When the second business had revenues of 20,000 rupees, its gross and net profits were much lower in comparison. These additional profits for the first business are due to its higher efficiency. This is the main reason why we must pay attention to both types of profitability ratios. To summarize, there are two types of profits. They are called gross profits and net profits. Gross profits are calculated by subtracting direct costs from revenues. We calculate gross profitability or gross margins by dividing gross profits by revenues. Gross margin tells us how efficiently a business manages its raw material and labor costs. Net profits are the final profits for a business after subtracting all costs from revenues and other incomes. We calculate net profitability by dividing net profits by revenues. Net margins tell us how efficient the overall business is or how efficiently it is managing all its costs. That, in a nutshell, is about profit and profitability in a business.